if you remember, weeks ago, when Samba TV came out with those initial ratings for Ahsoka, and again, Samba TV measures households that are viewing something, and it's really only helpful to compare it to other things that Samba TV measures. But when they came out with the initial premiere, the first 6 days of Ahsoka, we got some interesting data. New data reveals Ahsoka's weak viewership versus Star Wars other shows. And this is that graphic that everyone was sharing around there. Of course, it resulted in Lucasfilm and Disney coming together to release for the first time their total views that they got on Ahsoka on a global scale over a week. And they said that was at 14 million views, and they could not be happier. The problem was there's nothing to compare it to. You couldn't be like, oh, well, it did better than this, did better than that, did worse than this, because it's the first time they released anything. And a lot of people try to say this is just bullshit. It can't be true. It couldn't have done worse than Obi-Wan and Book of Boba Fett and Mando Season 3. Well, now the Nielsen ratings are here, and that's actually exactly what we're finding out. Nielsen streaming top 10. Suits takes first place. Who is Aaron Carter debuts at number 2. I don't know who the fuck who is Aaron Carter, but it did beat Ahsoka in ratings, but Ahsoka is down at 5th. Now, 829 million minutes watched, that certainly seems respectable. That seems like a decent number, especially when you consider that Mando Season 3, its Season 3 debut when it got on the Nielsen streaming was right around the same, 823 million minutes watched. But unfortunately, you need to dig a little bit more into it because there's a reason. I said this from the beginning. There's a reason Ahsoka debuted 2 very long episodes, and it was so it could build up these numbers. The way they do this to get the total viewers just for something like Obi-Wan, look at what they did here. Obi-Wan Kenobi racks up huge premiere audience. Nielsen says more than 11 million people watched both shows in their opening weekend. You go down here to Obi-Wan. The Obi-Wan premiere averaged 11.18 million viewers, which is the million minutes watched divided by the 53-minute runtime of the episode. When you do this for Ahsoka, you start to discover the truth. In 3 days, Obi-Wan Kenobi had over 11 million people tune in. In 6 days, Ahsoka had 8.6 million people, right? That's a significant difference. 3 days versus 6 days, 11 to 8. But what about these other things? What about, I don't know, say Book of Boba Fett? Book of Boba Fett debuted. Only had like a 39-minute episode, a 1-episode debut, and only got 389 million minutes watched. But when you factor in the runtime, that averages out to 10 million people on a 4-day window compared to 8.6 million for Ahsoka. What about Mando Season 3? They actually did isolate just the numbers that they got from the Mando Season 3 debut, right? 57% of the 823 million minutes watched, but the episode was 42 minutes long. That averages out to, in a 5-day period, 11 million people. Yet Ahsoka over 6 days, 8.6. So it's telling us exactly what these numbers said. These numbers were an accurate representation of Ahsoka compared to everything else. When you just look at the million minutes watched, a lot of that depends on how long the runtime is. A lot of that depends on how long it's been on the air. Like Ahsoka came out on a Tuesday, whereas Obi-Wan came out on a Friday, and they only measure through Sunday. But when you put all of it together, it's clear and obvious if you do a little bit of research and a little bit of math that Ahsoka is significantly less than these other shows.
I'm going to quote a great man, Dennis Green. She is who we thought she was. That is exactly, and most people are not going to understand that reference at all, but Ahsoka is who we thought she was. A very popular character within a very small audience. That's essentially what she is. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. That's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with the fact that she's a popular character within a small audience, but it's a small audience. She has been put in this position as a character and elevated by Disney and Lucasfilm to become the face of Star Wars, and that's just not who she is. That's not who she was ever going to be. That's not who she was intended to be. And because they have destroyed so many other characters, this is kind of in their eyes, their last hope. And this is a disaster from a perspective of what they were attempting to make this character out to be. I do feel that there is a genuine discussion around the show from genuine Star Wars fans. It doesn't feel the same as the sequel trilogy in a lot of ways, where all it was if you don't like it, you're racist and sexist and blah, blah. Now it's like, well, maybe you should. A lot of people are like, well, have you seen Rebels? Have you seen Clone Wars? If you're criticizing it, and a lot of people that have seen Rebels and Clone Wars are criticizing it, to be clear, but a lot of people that love the show are fans of Rebels and Clone Wars. And that to me feels more like a prequel kind of discussion from fans. But the problem is Disney has elevated this show to be their flagship. That was their intent. This is going to save Star Wars, guys. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. Ahsoka doesn't need a fucking movie. She doesn't need her own fucking movie, but she's getting it.
She's had 7 seasons of Clone Wars.
Yeah.
She's had, you know, multiple arcs in Rebels. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the problem, is Disney doesn't know what the fuck they're doing with this universe, and they are desperate for anything to get traction, and they have oversold this character to be something that she never was intended to be in the first place, and she has no business being a flagship character. And so for that reason, based on their positioning, the show has become a colossal failure from that perspective. No one was talking about the ratings for Rebels or Clone Wars because it was never positioned to be this end-all be-all. It was like we knew what it was. It was kind of a niche thing within the Star Wars thing, or within the Star Wars universe. It's the same as what Andor, for all practical purposes, was, even though Disney had nothing left. Like, it wasn't like Disney was positioning Andor. Remember that? Like, the marketing, nothing like that. They weren't elevating Andor to be like the next, you know, wonderful adventure or whatever, you know what I mean? Andor was exactly what it was supposed to be. It was a niche. The problem is they
didn't try to overhype it or anything.
Right, right. And Ahsoka is something that has failed because of Disney's mismanagement of positioning this character to be the savior of Star Wars when she has never been that and never was going to be that.
Now, what I will say is this is the premiere, the first 2 episodes that came out. There was a lot of marketing. There was a lot of hype. They rolled out stuff at the theme parks. They did special screenings. They did everything they could, right, to get this off the ground. And it didn't go off the ground swimmingly. Who knows what it's sitting at now? Who knows if Anakin coming back, what that's done? I think that's really tough to judge from our perspective right now. When you look at social media, for their debut, it was massive, but the numbers don't back it up, because of the demographics associated with this, because of how active some of these fans are on social media. So maybe the return of Anakin, maybe Thrawn, maybe that'll give them a boost. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see and kind of determine that a little bit later. But for right now, these numbers, the Nielsen, everyone said, got to wait for the Nielsen. Okay. You can try to spin them if you want, but when you break it down by how many people watched, it reflects exactly the same thing that the Samba numbers do. And that's that it doesn't have the big reach that those other shows did. Mm-hmm. I don't like Nielsen because they have a small sample size. I think they only use like 20,000 TVs or something like that. They also, it doesn't really factor in. Say if somebody's watching it multiple times, right? If somebody watches this show multiple times, that will get factored into Nielsen. Wouldn't necessarily get factored into Samba. So there's pluses and minuses of everything, but you got to go with what we can. And both of them tend to back each other up in terms of ratings.